Hello, everybody, and welcome to I think it's our 51st online talk today. We have a real treat coming up, given to us by Helen Cooke. And I asked Helen to introduce herself, and then after she's introduced herself, I will make a formal introduction for the main talk. So welcome, everybody, and we hope you have a good time. Helen, please tell us a bit about yourself.
Thank you very much, Peter. And it's my pleasure to be here again to do another talk for the historical group. And today I'm going to be talking about apothecaries, as most of you probably know. My background is that I got a degree in chemistry from Manchester University, had a few years working in scientific publishing, and then got a job. I did a library course, got a job back at UMIST, and worked at UMIST for 20 years, moving over to the chemistry department, and then. After in 2004, I headed off to the United States and worked for GlaxoSmithKline for 10 years in total, moving back to Britain in about 2011. So ever since then, I've been a full-time volunteer for various organisations, including a couple of interest groups in the RSC and a local section group as well. So, Peter, that's my basic history.
Okay, thank you very much, Helen, and it's good to see that we have 67 people here. That's a really high number. In fact, we've got another one coming in right now. Okay, everybody, welcome. The talk this afternoon will be pills, potions, and poison, researching a 17th century apothecary. Helen, over to you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Okay, so everybody's seen the title. I've given my introduction, and so we'll move on to the next slide. So, what I'm really going to be talking about today is it's based on research that was all kicked off at Nantwich Museum, where I'm a volunteer, as I just mentioned. And the research was kicked off because we were putting on an exhibition. This is back in 2021 when we did the exhibition. And the title of the exhibition was Ouch. There's a poster there which we used to advertise it at the time. And the idea was to cover all aspects of healthcare in Nantwich from the 17th century until the foundation of the NHS, so 1945, that kind of time period. So covering healthcare, diseases in the town at the time, hospitals, physicians, dentistry, midwifery. And I'd always had this, I'd never done much research into apothecaries, but I'd always had this sort of secret interest in apothecaries. And so this was my golden opportunity to start to do a bit of research on that topic. So the very first thing that I looked at was a list of 17th century wills and inventories that are located in Nantwich Museum. So there's a big folder, and these were all bound up in this folder. So I started browsing through, and I very soon came across the one you can see outlined in red here, which was Rafe Wally, and he was an apothecary in Nantwich, and he died in 1661 on the 17th. Well, the 17th of September was when he was buried, actually. And the record here shows that an inventory was created of his belongings. That would be his belongings in his property where he lived, and also the shop where he practiced as an apothecary. And having got that piece of information, I knew at once that there was an apothecary that would be worth looking into. But then, of course, you've got the job of finding the inventory, the original inventory. And I was very fortunate in the sense that I was able to find, again, within the museum, there was actually a typed up transcription of the original inventory that was located at Cheshire Archives, and I'll come on to that in a few minutes. Now, these are just a couple of snapshots of the typewritten inventory, and you can see that this version was probably, I think it was probably created around about in the 1960s or early 70s, that sort of time frame. We don't know for sure exactly when this was compiled. But anyway, there's a couple of sections here that show the inventory for Rafe Wally. It confirms the date that the inventory was created. That's on the top of the screen up here. And it also says there was no will, and we already knew that from the other records that we were just looking at just now. It was quite common for there to be no wills, but usually there would have been an inventory to assess the wealth of the particular person concerned. So on the left, we've got items from the inventory of the house. And on the right, we've got some of the different kinds of medications and ingredients and so on that would have been in the shop where Rafe Wally where he worked. Now, I should say that Rafe Wally was not a special apothecary in any way. He was just a run-of-the-mill, small market town apothecary. And there were probably, well, there were plenty of other apothecaries around across the country at the time who would have been much better off and had a far larger inventory. So I would say he was pretty typical, actually, of inventory of apothecaries up and down the country in the smaller towns, but probably a bit more than you probably wouldn't get very many in tiny villages, but certainly the towns. There were, in some cases, several apothecaries at the same time in the different towns. Now, this is a picture of one of the, or a couple of the pages from the Cheshire Archives original inventory that we were able to get hold of a copy of. And you can see, if you're not familiar with transcribing and studying these kinds of inventories, it is actually quite hard work because the handwriting can be quite difficult to decipher, as we soon discovered. But having said that, you kind of get your eye in, and you can eventually get a better understanding of what the words mean and what the letters represent, and so on and so forth. And we have to bear in mind that this inventory itself would have been compiled by external people. So sometimes they've introduced spelling mistakes and all sorts of things which make life a little bit more complicated. So you may have seen when on the first screen that I have two conspirators, if you want to call them that, or people who have contributed an enormous amount to the work that I'm reporting on today, one of whom was Nicholas Wood from the Worshipful Society of Apothecaries. And because of his expertise, he was able to guide myself and I think also to some extent Fabio Parmigiani, who is another one of my partners in crime, who helped tremendously with all the work that we've been doing. So without their input, I would have struggled a lot if I was trying to do this all on my own without a huge amount of past experience on the topic. I will come back to the inventory shortly, but I'm just putting another slide here that if you're a bit confused by some of the terminology that's occurring, then it's just sort of high-level definitions here of what the different categories of items in the inventory were. Some of them would have been ingredients that which the apothecary would have used to formulate the medicines himself. Some of them are actually sort of ready-made items, and they're categorized into different classes. So in the inventory itself, there are various headings, and under those headings, you'll come across examples and, in fact, well, the items that were in the store, of course, and they would fall into these various categories. Now, I'm not expecting people to remember this, of course, and there won't be any tests or quizzes at the end. But if you do want to come back and revisit this information, of course, the talk's being recorded. So I'm just going to go back in time a little bit and we'll have a think about the origins of apothecaries. So the word apothecary is derived from the Greek originally, and the word was apotheki, I think is how it would be pronounced, but I'm not 100% sure of that. But basically it meant a storehouse. And this particular picture is of an 11th century picture of an apothecary from a book that was it was an Arabic medical treatise that was translated into English into Latin in the 14th century, and then obviously sometime later it would have been translated into English as well. So the picture, however, does show somebody who could be an apothecary who is dispensing some medicines, potions, or whatever to a customer. And I think the thing that gives this away, rather than this person being just a grocer or some other professional, there are some scales that you can see that the apothecary is actually holding on to, and that indicates that they were in the business of weighing out quantities of medications to when they were prescribed. Perhaps if they were prescribed back in those days, probably not, I guess. It would have just been a customer who would have come up and requested to purchase something. So in the UK, moving over to this part of the world, apothecaries, well, first of all, in the 12th century, the kind of people who later would have gone on to become apothecaries were sort of badged as being spicers, pepperers, and grocers at the time. And spicers were anyone who was connected with the spice trade. Pepperers were mostly wholesalers who were near to the coast, and they would have received imported goods. And they were separate. To some extent, they were completely separated, I think. Would have been some overlap probably, but they were separate people, separate organizations, and so on that were dealing in that way. And then later, in the 13th century, the term spicer apothecary came into existence. And then the two of them split up again. And so we ended up with apothecaries and spicers and grocers as we move on through the Middle Ages. Now, if that was a little bit confusing, I'm now just going to, I apologize if it was, but there were at the time three main categories of people who would be treating conditions that people would members of the public would have had, and dignitaries and everybody else as well. And these three classes of people would have been physicians, apothecaries, and surgeons or barber surgeons. And this is a picture of a barber surgeon tending a peasant's foot. Now, there were differences between these three categories. And the physicians, these would be the highly educated people who would have probably gone to Oxford, well, they would have gone to Oxford or Cambridge University in this country, and they would have studied medicine, and they would have qualified as physicians. And so they would have been the sort of upper class, if you like, of the medical practitioners. The apothecaries were the people who would have dispensed the medications to members of the public or customers that would have come into their shops. So I guess in a way, a lot like pharmacists or chemists that we all when we go in to get our prescriptions fulfilled, they would be the people who would have provided the medicines for us. And then there were the barber surgeons as well, and they were a different category. And their job was to perform very minor surgery and clean up wounds and just generally take care of some of the practical aspects of healthcare. The physicians were very much the people, they were the studious people who knew what to prescribe, but they may not have done very much in the way of the surgery that the surgeons would have had to do. Now, there was overlap. In London, there may not have been as much overlap, I suspect, as in the provinces. So, for example, in Nantwich, as it turns out, we did have a physician, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about him later on too. But in a place like Nantwich, there would have been doubling up on the activity, on the treatments and the roles of these various people, because the town may not have been big enough to support having several people who were all performing the individual activities separately. And as a consequence, there could sometimes have been turf wars as well between the different groups of people who were providing the medical care. So I'm just now going to move on to just get the slide, that's it. The Society of Apothecaries. I do want to mention the Society of Apothecaries. It was founded in 1617. And it later on became what is now referred to as the Worshipful Society of Apothecaries, and it still exists today, and it's located in London, in Blackfriars Lane in London. And it's a wonderful place to go and visit if you ever get chance, although you do have to make an appointment and book a tour. It's not open to the public all of the time. But I was very privileged to be able to go there in 2022, I think it was, to 2023. 2022. It was during just after the pandemic, really, that sort of time period, because it was my first trip down to London or even leaving Nantwich for a very long time. And down in London, I was presenting a paper, a poster there, and I did have the opportunity to go on a tour of the Apothecaries Hall as well. So saw some of these lovely items and the rooms that there are down there. But they were more the worshipful, well, the apothecaries was instrumental in raising the status of apothecaries, and it was all apothecaries in London who were practicing within a 7-mile radius of the town of the city centre had to be licensed by the society before they could practice. So it did provide a very important role in terms of standardizing and making sure that people were doing what they were supposed to do in their roles as apothecaries. So now I'm going to introduce Rafe Wally in a bit more detail. And this is a painting that Nantwich Museum's artist, a gentleman called Les Pickford, he put together. He does a lot of research when he's actually doing these historical paintings. And when I mentioned that we were going to be doing some work on apothecaries, he was quite interested and ended up doing this painting for us. And we've used it for all sorts of purposes, marketing purposes, and all sorts of other purposes ever since, really. And Rafe is obviously the chap there at the back with the sort of greeny coloured waistcoat. And he's got a book or maybe some kind of materia medica publication there. And we have some customers, a little child who looks a little bit sickly. So perhaps Rafe is dispensing or some medications to make the child feel better. Anyway, that's the story we tell. Now, in the museum, as well as having a very active group of researchers, we also have some family historians. I mean, they are researchers too, but they're very interested in family history. So we enlisted them to try to find a little bit more information about the Wally family, Rafe Wally in particular, and they were able to unearth some details for us. And we know that he was baptized at a church pictured in this picture at St Michael and All Angels Church in Middlewich, which is a South Cheshire town, which is about 12 miles or so away from Nantwich, which is where Rafe Wally was in his apothecary shop, of course. And his whole family appears to have lived there. And records were also found about the rest of the family too. And his brother, he had a brother, William Wally, who was he was actually trained as a doctor of physic or a physician, and records show that he attended Brasenose College in London. And after he had qualified, we think he must have moved back to Middlewich, and then from there he went on to Nantwich, as far as we can tell. And Rafe probably followed William down to Nantwich. Now, Rafe was 11 years younger than William, so there was quite a big age gap. We do know that William, as well as being a physician, he did double up on some of the other roles as well. We have evidence that he was performing surgery like a barber surgeon might have done, and he also he used to dispense medicines as well. So it's quite possible that Rafe was an apprentice to William Wally. When Rafe had moved down to Nantwich and served his apprenticeship, he married a lady called Mary Challoner in 1648, and they had a daughter also named Mary, who was baptized in 1648 too, about 9 months and 2 days after they got married, according to the records. So we know that there was just the one child that Rafe and his wife Mary had. And Rafe ended up dying, sadly, I'm giving away the plot now, in 1661. He was 36 years old, and he predeceased his wife Mary and his older brother William. Now, Rafe Wally's training would have consisted of being an apprentice, and he would have needed to have been registered with a trade or craft guild, which almost certainly would have been Chester's Company of Mercers and Ironmongers. Chester, of course, being the county town of Cheshire at the time. Nantwich was like the second largest town, the second most important town in Cheshire at that particular time, but it didn't have any I think I've been hopefully you can hear me now. I had a little unmute button that cropped up that turned up on the screen, so I clicked on that. So hopefully you can hear me. Anyway, Rafe would almost certainly have been registered at Chester's Company of Mercers and Ironmongers. And we did try to find out whether his apprenticeship was recorded anywhere in the Cheshire Record Office records. And unfortunately, there was a gap in the records for the time period when Rafe would have been an apprentice. So we were unable to actually confirm that. However, the Chester Company, once he had qualified, they would have kept an eye on him to some degree as well. He'd have been allowed to practice legally in Nantwich, and they would have checked the quality of the goods that he was providing. And this crest on the left-hand side here, this dates back to around about 1720 when apothecaries were actually added. And you can see, hopefully, that apothecaries are on here. If I move, maybe able to get my mouse over there. There we are. So it says apothecaries at in this section of the shield. But in Rafe's time, they would have just been the Company of Mercers and Ironmongers. We have confirmation from Chester Parish records that Rafe was an apothecary. It says there's a word there that it actually, when you transcribe it, it's potkari. And to begin with, that got us a bit confused, but later on we came across it in other places, and potkari undoubtedly is a corruption of the word apothecary. Where did he live? Well, he was in Nantwich Town Square. And if you look at the picture in the middle there, sitting around about 1960, that was a chemist shop. And I'll show you something in a moment which makes us think that had been a chemist shop or an apothecary shop for a very long time. On the left-hand side, left-hand image, we've got a 1900 picture. And partly why I've included that is because I like the fire engine that's in the picture there. The chemist shop is right over on the left-hand side of the screen of the picture. It's not right dead center, but the picture in the middle is probably the one that gives the best representation. And then one I took at the end of 2024, it's no longer a chemist. It ceased to be a chemist in the 1970s, and it's now a coffee shop. And this is from a local trade directory, which gives us additional evidence that this was an apothecary shop. We can't 100% rely on this. It is a trade directory, not any kind of really official record, but it was, according to the top of the advert up there, it says Ye Olde Apothecary Shop 1581, which indicates that there had been an apothecary shop on that site since 1581. I'm now going to move on and have a look at the contents of the shop, the inventory, and also the contents of Rafe Wally's home. So there are two images there from the inventory itself, which consisted of about, I think it was about 12 pages in total, including the home and the shop. But the one on the left is purely the contents of the shop. The one on the right on the left is the home, and on the right is the shop, as it says above those clippings from the inventory. And just the only thing I really wanted to point out here was that they were appraised by different people. So to appraise a home, you needed different skills compared to if you were appraising and valuing an inventory in a shop, which was a specialist operation like an apothecary. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then on the right, we do have the total value of Rafe Wally's possessions. That's including his house and the shop. And it comes to £66, 6 shillings and 6 pence. Researchers at the museum have done a bit of work into the wealth of different residents of Nantwich, and he certainly wasn't rich by comparison with other tradespeople in the town. He was sort of in the middle range, towards the lower end of the middle range on the wealth status, so not a particularly well-to-do person. The contents of the house, just a quick look now at some of the things that were there. Well, first of all, in red, we can confirm that he's Rafe Wally. He's up there, top left, on the in the picture of the transcription of picture of the inventory. The inventory for the shop for the house was assembled on the 22nd of October 1661. And then these are just some of the things that are in the different rooms. These are in the living quarters, of course. So all the kinds of things that you might expect to find today. I think I was a little bit surprised by the 5 dozen napkins. It seemed a little bit excessive for somebody living in a relatively compact apothecary shop, but there you go. Maybe that's what they had a lot of in those days. Some items that were in the house were probably actually used in the shop. So, for example, we've got one brass mortar and pestle, and then we've got two stillers, and they were probably in the kitchen. So maybe the apothecary Rafe Wally was using the kitchen to prepare perhaps some of the medications that he was later on going to dispense through his shop. So, what information sources might Rafe Wally have had to help with preparing medications? Well, possibly he would have had access to a copy of John Gerard's Herbal. John Gerard was a very well-known herbalist. He happened to be born in Nantwich, but by the time he wrote his Herbal, he was living in London. So, but bearing in mind there was a bit of a connection there, possible that there would have been a copy of John Gerard's Herbal in the town. The Pharmacopoeia Londinensis, this was a landmark publication written in London. And if you want to learn more about it, there's a whole story associated with the foundation, the compilation of the Pharmacopoeia Londinensis and how it originated and so on. And there's a reference there at the bottom of the screen. And anyway, the Pharmacopoeia Londinensis, it was written in Latin. It laid down formulas and standards to which apothecaries were obliged to conform when they were preparing their prescriptions from the physicians. But it didn't give any indication of what the medicine was supposed to treat, which could have been a bit tricky, except I think separating out like it is today almost really, your doctor prescribes something, then they give that prescription to the pharmacist, and then the pharmacist composes the medication and dispenses it to the customers and so on. These days, of course, pharmacists are performing a lot more than just giving away medicines as well, but it's not so dissimilar to how things were back in the 1600s, I guess, in terms of the roles. The Pharmacopoeia Londinensis was translated into English starting around about I think that it was the 1650 edition that was translated first of all, and then as new editions appeared, then Nicholas Culpeper, botanist, herbalist, physician, and astrologer, he translated the Pharmacopoeia Londinensis into English. And as time went on, he added an increasing amount of information about what the medications were going to treat. Okay, let's now finally get on to the shop and have a look at what we've got going on there. So various categories of medications and ingredients that we're going to come across. An inventory of the goods in the shop is what's written at the top there, and that's at the very top of the page on the right in that section from the inventory. Simple distilled waters, cinnamon water, lemon essence, a Theriaca londinensis. This would have been made up of multiple components and was a bit of a cure-all, I think, because it had so many different components within it that you would hope that one of them would be efficacious against whatever you were treating. And another one, lupulol or hops, that could have been used for medical purposes or even for flavouring beer, who knows. Olea chimica, a few examples there under that heading. Some of them we might not consider to be oils, or we might not consider them to be chemicals even. So we've got sulfuric acid or oleum vitrioli there at the top, and then the other ones are listed underneath, and oils like juniper oil, for example, castor oil, and so on, also listed under the chemical oils. We have to bear in mind that sometimes the person who was compiling the inventory may not have got the categorization quite right, but it still was a useful guide. We've got plasters here, emplastrum, and they were plastered with a base of vegetable and animal fats, and they were used to draw undesirable matter from ulcers and the like. And there are several others there that I haven't gone into the detail of, but we've got Paracelsi, named after presumably Paracelsus, and we believe that may have been used in pregnancy and childbirth. And then there's an intriguing one here, species. Now, species would not necessarily all have been live species, but this particular, or even species, animal species at all, they were just another category in the inventory. But there is one here that captures the imagination of people who study this kind of thing, lumbricos, which are live earthworms that are used to make oil of earthworm. Oil of earthworm. It was apparently used for treating bruises, arthritis, gunshot wounds, and all sorts of other complaints. It's amazing the diversity of different complaints that these remedies actually treated or were supposed to treat. And this little jar is just an image I got from the Science Museum. And this is a jar in which the oil of earthworms would have been stored. And there's a little spout there very conveniently so that you could pour it out into the little bottle that you'd presumably be passing on to your customers in the shop. As well as these specific categories, there were a number of other raw ingredients that were included in the inventory. And these would, of course, have been the ingredients that Rafe Wally would have used when he was formulating his medications to prescribe. That within these there are some categories, but I'm not going to go into all of the details of these. So there were in total 5 pages, I think, of these various ingredients. Right, just bear with me. I'm just catching up with my notes, getting ahead of myself a little bit here. So, okay, so the raw ingredients, yes, there were 5 pages. That was the thing I wanted to check first of all. All sorts of things included, for example, musk, gentian root, saltpeter, linseed oil, capers, frankincense, licorice, dried coconut pulp, aniseeds, rhubarb, which is presumably medicinal rhubarb rather than the rhubarb you might grow in your garden, and various spices and other things too. So a mixture of things that could have all been used for medicinal purposes, but he might also have just been selling some of these spices and things that would have flavored cooking. He might well have distributed those and sold them as well. One or two quite interesting ones, which again catch your imagination. Mumia, and that was very widely available, supposedly available in many apothecaries across the country. So nothing very special as far as Rafe Wally was concerned. And throughout the Middle Ages and a long time afterwards, mummy was an important article in the stock-in trade of the apothecary, which may seem very strange, but apparently its efficacy was it was very useful, held in high esteem, and commercially it used to fetch a good price as well. So there was quite a trade in mummy from Egypt, where they extracted this substance that they believed looked like bitumen, but in fact it was the seeping out of these mummified remains, and then it was sold in all different parts of, certainly across Europe, and held in high esteem by customers. There were various poisons in the apothecary's listing of ingredients as well, which would scare us all a little bit today, I think, but all on the same page. We've got white mercury, red lead, white lead, and arsenic shown there, highlighted there in red on the inventory itself. And there were plenty of other ones as well. So, for example, we've got quicksilver, which is not listed on that particular page in the inventory, but it is in Rafe Wally's inventory, and presumably this would have been pure mercury. That was listed amongst the ingredients, and so therefore it would have probably been used compounded with something else. And in this case, this is an extract of Culpeper's translation of the Pharmacopoeia Londinensis, and it does in this case show what it might have treated people for. So the line at the bottom, it says, "My opinion of this ointment is briefly this: it was invented for the itch. Without quicksilver, it will do no good. With quicksilver, it may do harm." So he doesn't seem to have a lot of faith in quicksilver, even though it would have been widely available and used at the time in the 17th century. We've got white mercury here, corrosive sublimate, and this was HgCl2 rather than pure mercury, used to treat syphilis and as an antiseptic until relatively recently, I think until the 20th century. And the picture of the bottle on the left-hand side there, this is obviously a relatively modern bottle. This would have been from the 20th century in all probability. And it's this one I think originated, it's one I got off Wikipedia or somewhere like that. And it has its origins in America, I think, this particular one. But interestingly, it says on the label, it says caution to be only used by or on the prescription of a physician, dentist, or veterinarian if used medicinally, which is a little worrying. And then it says poison underneath, and they do provide information about the antidote, which you may be able to see that you would have been able to take if you were wanting to undo the bad things that the corrosive sublimate might have done to you. This was around in, certainly it was listed, if white mercury was listed in the inventory, and also it appears in Culpeper. And you can see from that clipping from Culpeper on the right of the screen that it's listed there. Red and white lead, they were ones that I just mentioned in the inventory too. And just playing catch up with my notes here again now. So red lead's name was minium, and it originated from a river in northwest Iberia where it was first mined. And white lead is so red lead, Culpeper claims it was an ointment that was good for sores, for example. The white lead, which would have been basic lead carbonate, that may have been used in cosmetics, that sort of white powder, the color. And Culpeper also mentions, white lead quite a bit more frequently. He refers to cerussite, PbCO3, which may have been what Rafe had, although it wasn't actually listed as that, I don't think, in his inventory, used in ointments and plasters. Arsenic, also listed in the inventory, of course, and Culpeper doesn't give any uses for arsenic. We haven't discovered specific things from that time period that arsenic was used for. But in past times, it was known as inheritance tax. Its poisonous properties were known about for a very, very long time. And it was, in fact, used to eradicate some troublesome, if you had troublesome relatives, you might have tainted their food or whatever with arsenic in order to dispose of them. Nowadays, of course, I think if you have a post-mortem, they'll soon pick up if you've got any arsenic in your blood. But in those days, it would have been more tricky. Medical uses included as an antimicrobial and also to treat syphilis, of course. And then there's a modern usage where a good example of how an old remedy has been repurposed, but in a very strategic and targeted way. And this particular product, which is actually arsenic trioxide, it would have been used, it is used, I think, by injection. It's injected and it's used to treat a specific form of leukemia. So a very well targeted drug that is prepared with arsenic now. Now, as part of this talk, I was planning on showing some little videos that Fabio had done when we'd done some outreach activities, but I decided in the interest of time, and I can see I'm already going to be running short of time here, that I wouldn't actually show the videos. So apologies if you were expecting a lot of videos. I think I did mention them in the original description, but that was sort of superseded a bit, because I'll tell you later on about a video that another video that you can have a look at that Fabio he recorded recently of some demonstrations that he did for a university in Milan. So I'm going to skip over the demos and leave Fabio's far superior interpretation of things to mine. But I will just mention that in the inventory, there were all the ingredients, well, not quite all the ingredients, but if you did want to make gunpowder, you'd have had what you needed in order to do it, because there was saltpeter in the inventory, there was sulfur in the inventory, and charcoal not listed in the inventory, but then again it would have been very widely available just all over the place in Britain at the time. So you've got your charcoal as well. Combine those together, and basically you can get gunpowder from that. The sulfur and the saltpeter, they would have been listed in the they were listed in the inventory in the ingredients section, and sulfur can be used and was used for helping to compose a number of different medications that Rafe would have dispensed from his shop. Finally, we've got tools and equipment. So the very last things listed in the inventory are some of the things that Rafe Wally would have had to actually mix up his ingredients, and also bottles and so on that the ingredients would have been stored in, and also lancets and incision knives, which are fairly interesting, because that does imply that that Rafe would have been perhaps involved with doing some surgery as well as as well as giving out the medicines, dispensing the medicines. Just to come back to the books, I think I forgot to mention he didn't have any books. A number of apothecaries did have books in their inventories, but it may be that his books were the property. Maybe he borrowed books from his brother. We can speculate a bit as to why he didn't have any books. Maybe his brother William had the books, and so he lent them to Rafe, or maybe even if Rafe did had some, maybe William would have removed them before the inventory was appraised and valued. Who knows? We don't know the true answer to that. Now, I do give a talk, a related talk to this one, to community groups around the Nantwich area. I've done quite a few at Nantwich Museum itself, but I also go out to groups in the local area. And the question they always ask is, well, not always, but a very common question is, did Rafe Wally stock leeches? Because everybody associates leeches, I think, with medicine, the ancient medicines in that sort of 17th century time period. And the sad answer to that question is no, he didn't. And this picture is of just a jar that would have contained leeches. So no leeches in Rafe Wally's inventory. The inventory was witnessed by a W. Wally, and the W. Wally was almost certainly Rafe's brother, William. In fact, he must have been his brother, who would have had the knowledge to do a good assessment of the value of the contents. The next name above is Eustace Crewe. And Eustace Crewe, it turns out he was a name that crops up quite often, certainly in the northwest of England, when it comes to appraising and valuing inventory, the inventories of apothecaries. And he was another apothecary himself from Wrexham in North Wales. So hopefully he would be keeping an eye on the procedures and also confirming Rafe Wally's assessments as well. The name at the top, I don't know who that person is. I haven't actually done any investigation to find out. Now, quite a complicated slide here, and I'm not expecting you to have to read it all in the time that we've got available, but you can always come back and have a look later. But something that Nicholas Wood was really helpful in compiling was we put together a spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet, we'd put all the original names of the substances that were in the original inventory. And then we referred to the translation that we'd already seen, and we cross-checked it. And Nick Wood was really helpful with all of this. And of course, Fabio too, especially as he had a good knowledge of Italian. And I always like to think there's a link between the Italian and the Latin, which would have helped in a number of cases here as well. And we referred to publications like Culpeper to get information. This is in the used to treat column that we've got here on the screen. And so we got a lot of information from various different sources. And we also put in the values that were in the inventory too. And this is just a small snapshot, actually. Now, I'm not going to dwell on this, but if you do want to come back to it, these are some of the sources that we consulted when we were compiling the spreadsheet. Okay, so one question that I was always curious about was, how did the materials that Rafe Wally, small, fairly inconsequential apothecary in a provincial town, how did the materials get to him that he needed to formulate and to dispense these medicines? Well, London, of course, was a big hub for trade, and many items were imported to London or processed there and then distributed across the country. And Nantwich was quite well served by trade routes. So little Nantwich is here in, oops, can't get my mouse to go where I want it to go at the moment, but hopefully you can see on the left-hand side of that, on that slide, there's Nantwich on the map. And that's what the town was looking like at the time. But there were trade routes going off to the northwest up to Liverpool and to North Wales. Then there was a southerly route to London and also northwest up to Manchester as well. And we do know that we know for sure that in 1623, the items listed there, pepper, sugar, cloves, nutmeg, and so on, were all available in Nantwich at the time. Some of them would have been distributed through grocers or mercers, but others may well have come through to Rafe Wally in his role as the apothecary. What was life like in Nantwich for Rafe in his time? Well, this is a map from the end of this is I think it was 1699, something like that. Oh, 1691, sorry, that map was put together. And the layout of Rafe Wally's shop was of Nantwich was pretty much as it would have been at the time that Rafe Wally had his shop. The town still looks roughly the same. It's got a church. Rafe, his business would have been about here, where I'm pointing to with my mouse, and that's where his apothecary business and home would have been located. So what were the biggest challenges for Rafe during that period? Well, there were a lot of diseases and hazards around, as you might imagine. And this little table is a reflection of some other research that people in the research group at the museum undertook, calculating the diseases were around, the number of deaths, and so on and so forth. And plague is the dominant one there, isn't it? So 1604, before Rafe Wally's time, but right through to 1645. And then we've got plague, more plague, smallpox later on. And we also have a couple of hazards like floods and the Civil War and the Battle of Nantwich to contend with as well, which was slap bang in the middle of when Rafe Wally would probably have been doing his apprenticeship. And that would have been quite a hazardous time for him. Anyway, moving on from that, how could Rafe Wally have helped to treat the plague? Well, one of the items in the inventory was this one. I don't know if I can pronounce it right, Pillai Ruffy. And these pills are of ancient invention and long fame, says Culpeper, and they are commonly called pestilential pills, that is to say, they treated plague. In addition, they strengthen the heart, hinder the corruption of the humours, move the courses in women, clear the voice, and contribute that ways to ensure the ingenious the content of those that are delighted to sing in parts. So it again a multitude of things, and must have been a very good thing for opera singers to partake of as well. Their ingredients were reputed as a sovereign medicament to strengthen the body by Paracelsus. He believed in them as well. And other things too that Rafe had, he might have had some theriacs, he might have had some nicotine or tobacco. All of these apparently were efficacious at treating plague. The Civil War I mentioned. Now, did Rafe Wally provide remedies to treat wounded soldiers? That's a question. Just out by coincidence, this coming Saturday, we have a reenactment of the Battle of Nantwich. I'm not going to start talking at length about that, but it is a very big weekend in the town. But it was a fairly short-lived battle, but it was in the middle of the Civil War during the time of Charles I in England in the 17th century. And we do have some evidence that perhaps that Rafe Wally might have actually played a small role in treating the wounded soldiers who were passing through Nantwich in 1651. And this evidence comes from this Civil War petition. It's a fascinating database, nothing to do with chemistry or history of chemistry even, but for anyone who's interested in the Civil War, there are these petitions that survivors of the Civil War who may have lost their loved ones or soldiers who passed on or were wounded or killed. They were looking for compensation from the government or the local authorities to enable them to claim funding to mitigate some of the distress they must have experienced, of course. And this one certifies that Mr. William Wally had hath had in cure soldiers of my company, which he was very careful of. They were wounded in the last expedition against the Scots, and Mr. Wally has under his hands in cure of my major's company, both wounded at Worcester. So they were passing back through Nantwich. We've got William Wally highlighted there in the middle of that image, named specifically, and then two people who are known to be dignitaries in Nantwich as well. And so we assume this was all happening in Nantwich. So it's just feasible that Rafe Wally might have given William the medications that he actually needed to treat the wounded soldiers. We don't know for sure, but it's a nice thing to think about anyway. So all of this has led to a number of outreach activities that we've done at Nantwich Museum and elsewhere as well. So I'm just going to run very quickly through these. We had an exhibition that I mentioned right at the start, the Ouch exhibition, and we made a poster that we put on the wall about apothecaries. This was quite in the early days. A lot more research was done after this was created, actually. Another version of this talk we ran at the time, and this was recorded. This is actually available through Nantwich Museum's YouTube channel. And this was a collaboration between Fabio, Nick Wood, and myself. We wrote a little booklet about the same thing, of course, pills, potions, and poisons. This is a recurring theme, isn't it, with the titles of these various things. We did some talks to members of the public who came into the museum, and we've done a number of outreach in community groups, as I mentioned before. This is the poster that was presented at the Worshipful Society of Apothecaries event in 2022, celebrating the 350th anniversary of the foundation of the laboratories at the Worshipful Society. Last year, 2 years ago now, sorry, 2023, we did a very nice roller banner. We got some funding from the Royal Society of Chemistry, and we produced some nice roller banners talking about the history of objects and events in Nantwich and bringing in the science. And this is one of those, one example. And we also do outreach activities for school kids and also holiday workshops for children. And this was one of those holiday workshops. And finally, I do just want to mention this outreach activity that Fabio did in Milan. Fabio works at the Politecnico di Milano, but I think this was for another university, medical school in Milan. And I do strongly recommend watching this. I showed this to people over Christmas who were visiting us, relatives and friends, and they were people who were not chemists or historians, and they were just sitting absolutely riveted watching this video. So I do strongly encourage you to have a look at that video, and it will cover all of the demonstrations that I really haven't had time to do today. We're also very pleased to have been able to publish in Pharmaceutical Historian. That one is available open access on the web. And we've just had accepted a publication which does a lot more of the sort of chemistry side of things, and it's going to go into the Journal of Chemical Education, but unfortunately it's not quite there yet. I wish it had been in time for this talk today. It's got a DOI, but don't bother copying that because I don't think it's working still at the moment. And finally, I just want to thank all the people who were involved and concerned with this. I've mentioned them already, really, starting from the top, Fabio Parmigiani, Nicholas Wood, Nantwich Museum staff and volunteers, who I couldn't have possibly done this without them, and Cheshire Archives and Local Studies, who were very supportive all the way through and have continued with when we've been requesting permission for using their materials in the publications and talks and all the rest of it. So I think that is the conclusion. So Peter, I'll hand back to you. And I realise I've probably spent a bit too long, as usual, when I'm doing the talk.
Not to worry, not to worry. It was very, very interesting. Well, thank you very much, Helen. And that was an absolutely fascinating talk with all kinds of different kinds of details. So thank you very much for that. We just have basically one question, which is, I was going to ask about deleteries, but you mentioned deleteries, so I don't have to do that. There's also a question about training, but I think you dealt with the training mostly in the talk. So the basic question we're left with now, oh, by the way, somebody asked how much £66 was. So while you were talking, I looked up the Bank of England inflation calculator, and amazingly, it goes back to 1661, and it says it will be worth 10,500, which doesn't sound very much, but these inflation things are very difficult to work out, and I will take them with a pinch of salt, particularly for a period like that. Anyway, so the question we have is, he died at 36. Why did he die at 36, at the age of 36? I have a suspicion here, but I'll leave it to you. Somebody thinks it might have something to do with the poison in his shop, but I don't think so. Probably
Yeah,
not.
well, we do wonder about that actually, Peter. And I meant to mention that that was probably the reason for it, but for sure he would have been surrounded by some pretty nasty substances, I think, including the mercury and the lead and so on that we talked about.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, one of the most common diseases in that period, apart from maybe the plague, which was more intermittent, was TB. I mean, 36 sounds like the right sort of age for TB. Do you think he could have died of TB? Maybe caught from one of his patients?
He could have, who knows? The records that we have that our researchers have looked into don't suggest that TB was particularly prevalent, but it may just not have been a major killer at the time. But yes, it could easily have been TB. Yeah.
Do we know where he's buried? I mean, had he got a grave somewhere, or was,
I don't, yeah, I don't think we do actually. That must be, it must be possible to find that out because we do know exactly when he was buried. That's something I'm not sure of.
hmm. And what about his daughter? I mean, did his daughter have any descendants?
We haven't explored that at all. We haven't dug into the family history really, anything beyond the very close family.
Okay, okay. It'll be interesting if there was somebody
Um,
lurking around in Nantwich or indeed anywhere else.
yeah. There are a lot of Wallies actually. Wally is an extremely common name in Nantwich. When I moved to Nantwich, I'd not come across
Right.
Wallies before,
Okay,
but
okay,
there are lots of them here still today.
okay. And of course, since it was his daughter, their name wouldn't be Wally, would it? But,
No, I'll have to get my family historians on the case, I think, and see what they can come up with.
okay, I might have a look myself actually. I've got a subscription to Ancestry at the moment, so I might look it up. Okay, well, Helen, thank you very much for an absolutely fascinating talk, even if there weren't any leeches involved. And I'm sure people will want to go and have a look at Fabio's talk. Fabio's with us, by the way, so hello, Fabio. And people will want to have a look at that other talk, which has these demonstrations you've spoken about. So that would be particularly interesting. So anyway, thank you very much again, and goodbye for now. And I hope you all have a good afternoon. And next month, we're going to have a talk about wartime painting painted for ICI during the Second World War by Diana Leach, who's come from the same area as Helen, but she's going to be talking about the paintings at ICI. I hope so, anyway. So that will be next month. And in the meantime, I hope we all have a very good afternoon. Bye for now.